back to another video. Today I thought I would do something difficult and I'd start with make it sick right fresh in the morning. Usually I wait till the afternoon, but let's switch it up. Varied practice, as they say. What we do, we check Anki right away. No cards for today. All right. What did we read then yesterday? The day before we would have read about the cranberries on the string and the retrieval practice tying it. Right, we only got to 2 paragraphs yesterday, but they were big. We learned the definition of the testing effect, which is what? Well, the testing effect is basically the term for the phenomena where retrieval leads to better learning than, or just efficient learning. So retrieval leads to good learning, deep learning, efficient learning. Basically, it's just saying that retrieval leads to learning. That's the testing effect. To be most effective retrieval practice, well, one thing before that, the testing effect is also known as the retrieval practice effect. Okay, so to be most effective, retrieval practice should be spaced out over time, so that instead of just becoming a mindless repetition, it becomes effortful. If they're spaced out through time, you have to use more cognitive effort. We already learned that more cognitive effort leads to deeper learning. Cool. Okay. What else? Right. I also put in my own 2 cents, my own intuition about why spacing out retrieval practice is effective, whereas not spacing them out and just doing them back to back to back is not as effective. And this is a little bit different than just effort alone. It has to do with long-term versus short-term memory. And for retrieval practices to be most effective, the thing you're retrieving needs to be not in short-term memory. It needs to be only in long-term memory. And you need to pull it out of long-term memory and into short-term memory. And then it needs to leave short-term memory. You need to fill up your short-term memory with something else and then pull it back out of long-term memory again and put it back into short-term memory. Cool? Got it. Anything else? I feel like there's something else. Definition of the retrieval testing effect. To maximize the retrieval effect or testing effect, retrieval practice via spacing out reps, effort, and short-term memory versus long-term memory. Okay, right, there's other things. So right there, I just got Q2. Retrieval practice leads to two things. At least probably more than that, but the 2 things mentioned here is retrieval practice, repeated retrieval practice, build a mental representation of the skill or knowledge you're learning, build a more accurate mental representation of something in the physical world or something outside. You can basically internalize it into a mental representation. And the more retrieval practice you have, the more the neural paths you have to that representation. If you retrieve something enough, it can become reflexive, meaning it's you can perform something or say something or do something before you even think about doing it, just as a reflex. Cool. All right. I said retrieval leads to better learning than re-exposure. Okay, I guess that's the testing effect. So I kind of had the definition incorrect. I think it has to do specifically with re-exposure. So the testing effect is that the phenomena where retrieval practice leads to better learning than re-exposure. Cool. So this phenomena was observed long before modern science by the likes of the book mentions Aristotle, Francis Bacon, William James, and they all observed this testing effect phenomena, not obviously calling it testing effect, but seeing that multiple recalls, retrievals, recitations lead to deeper learning. Cool, that's it for yesterday. Now it's time to get back in. And we've got a lot of time today, so I'm excited. Okay, we're going to be able to finish the testing effect section today. So I'm going to either finish it right now, or I'm going to read about half of it and then retrieve and then finish it up. So I'll talk to you guys in a second. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have finished. We have finished the testing effect section. And so dang, I forgot what the first paragraph is about. All right, yeah. Despite the evidence that we have about the effectiveness of testing as a learning tool, traditional education systems still largely lack utilizing it. This 2010 New York Times post kind of showed a scientific study that in which students who read a passage and then were immediately tested upon the information that they had just read were compared to a group that just read it without a test immediately afterward. And the group that got tested immediately after reading the passage scored 50% better than the group that just read it without testing after a week later. So they retained 50% more information. And we're like, yeah, the authors are like, that's pretty great. That's pretty astounding. So, but look what happened in the comments. Look what these people said about it, like the general reaction. Oh, testing sucks. Stressful learning, that's no way to learn. Like, that's not going to help me. We don't need to memorize anything. It's stupid. Like, we need to learn how to actually do things, not just memorize things. And the authors, again, this is, again, the dipstick versus learning tool of learning and creativity versus knowledge. The false dichotomy that knowledge is separate from creativity and that we should focus on creativity and ingenuity and not knowledge, when in reality they're synergistic. The more knowledge you have about a certain subject, the more creative you can be, more nuanced you can be, the more innovative you can be. The less knowledge you have about something, your creativity is going to be much weaker and less effective, and you're going to be less creative. So they're synergistic. They're not separate. And so, yeah. False dichotomy, pitting knowledge and memorization versus creativity. And also saying, it's stressful, this and that. That's, people are confusing learning with memorization, this and that. And the author is again saying, well, if memorization is not needed in learning at all, please don't tell your neurosurgeon that and stuff like that, like your pilots and people that have memorized these procedures on how to keep you alive. Yeah, go ahead and tell them, memorization, we don't need that shit. Like, that's stupid. You should learn how to be creative when you're flying a plane. Yeah, fly this commercial airline and do some like crazy shit, bro. Do some barrel rolls and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Nope, I think that's it. That's the testing effect section completed. How we do it. What was this section about? I'll say retrieval practice being a more effective learning tool than re-exposure. Cool. I mean, personally, 50% sounds great, but it also doesn't sound like that much. It's like if after 1 week, group A remembered 20% of the information and group B remembered 30%, it's like, that's still really bad for both. So it would have been good to know the difference, actually. Like, are we talking the difference between 50 and 75? Maybe. That's better. 60 and 90? That would be great. But yeah, studying the testing effect in the lab. So this is the next section. This is a 2.5 page section. We'll start out, as always, by writing what is this section about next to the title. All right, and now I'm going to go ahead and start reading. I've got a decent amount of time. I'm going to go ahead and read a paragraph or two, and then we will recall and probably call it a day. I'll talk to you in a second. All right, guys, just started studying the testing effect in the lab, right? Section. I just covered 2 landmark studies about experimenting, studying the testing effect. And the first ever study conducted on the testing effect occurred in 1917, and in this test, I think it was like 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 8th graders, or 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 8th graders. Like, these elementary, middle school students were given passages from the Who's Who of America. Must have been some like biography type material, and they were instructed at varying intervals and amounts of time to, while they're reading, look away from the book and think to themselves what they were just reading and what that was about. One group did none of that, right? They just kept rereading over and over again, and then some group did that every couple minutes, some did every 30 seconds. It was varying. And they tested the students after 3 to 4 hours after their reading, and they were just told to write down as much as they could remember about what they read. And they found that the group that was able to recall the most about what they had read was the group that had spent about 60% of their time reciting. So only 40% of the time reading, 60% of their time reciting. So the group that just kept rereading read 2.5 times more than them. Like, they reread it 2.5 times probably, and they scored worse on what they could recall than the group that spent 60% of the time reciting. And if you look at what I've done today, I just checked how much time I had spent talking to the camera, and this is a 2-minute video so far, and the other, I think, combined were 11 minutes, so 13 minutes out of the 24 minutes. So 13 out of 24, will be about 14 out of 25. That's roughly 60%. That doesn't include the time I was taking notes and thinking while reading. So I probably spent more time than 60%, so maybe it's not the most effective, but I think I'm in the range, potentially. So that's that. That was the first study. The second study was another landmark study that occurred. This one was in 1939, in which what did they do here? They were giving, I think, middle school students again, potentially, like a 600-word essay to read our passage, and then they were given tests at varying intervals until the final test after 2 months. and after the 2 months is where they were really looking for who did better based on the interval. But the interesting things they found were first, the longer it took to get that first initial exam, so you read the passage, the longer it takes for you to read the first passage and then take your first test, the more forgetting occurred. But then after the first test, forgetting like diminished significantly. Like the meaning, the amount they were forgetting between tests after the first test was like drastic. But the longer it took after the initial reading to the first test is where they saw the most forgetting. So ultimately, I think you want to test immediately. That's the most optimal. Um, that's my kind of inductive reasoning, or interpretation, extrapolation of that study. So that's it for today. We read about the testing effect, and now we're reading about what did we read in the testing effect again? Right, that New York Times study, not being a testing effect, not being utilized in traditional education systems. People's complaints about the study, their false dichotomy of knowledge, memorization, and creativity, and and then the two studies and the studying the testing effect in the lab. That's it for today. I'll talk to you guys later.